My name is Clara Mercer. I'm 34 years old, and until one ordinary Tuesday evening, I believed that love could survive almost anything. I believed that marriage was built on trust, that family would stand beside you when life became difficult, and that the people sitting across your dinner table would never become the people you feared the most. I was wrong. Today, the scars stretching across my neck and shoulder remind me of that lesson every morning. Most people who meet me now assume they came from a terrible accident. Some politely avoid asking. Others stare for a second longer than they realize. I don't blame them anymore. Because the truth is far stranger than anything they could imagine. The burns were never an accident. They were the price my husband believed I should pay for refusing to surrender everything I owned. If you're listening to my story today, let me tell you something before we begin. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers. Sometimes it wears a wedding ring, smiles across the dinner table, kisses you goodnight, and patiently waits for the perfect moment to destroy your life. Mine certainly did. My father spent 40 years building a real estate business across Chicago. He wasn't born wealthy. He drove delivery trucks, repaired roofs during freezing winters, and worked every weekend until he finally owned his first commercial building. Over the next 3 decades, he purchased more properties, renovated abandoned neighborhoods, and built a company that people respected. Before he died, he told me something I have never forgotten. Money isn't dangerous, Clara. The wrong people are. At the time I laughed. I thought he was worrying too much. After all, I had Julian. Or at least, I thought I did. Julian Mercer was charming in every possible way when we met. He knew exactly what to say. He opened doors. He remembered birthdays. He volunteered at charity events. Everyone loved him. Even my father admitted Julian seemed like a good man, although he quietly advised me to keep my inheritance separate after we married. I trust you, Dad told me one evening. But never confuse love with financial security. Again, I thought he was simply being protective. After Dad passed away, everything he owned was transferred into a carefully structured trust. Several commercial buildings, office properties, retail centers, investment accounts. The trust protected every asset from future lawsuits, the creditors, or anyone who tried to pressure me into giving them away. At the time, I barely paid attention to the paperwork. Now I thank my father every single day. Because that trust eventually saved my life. The first year of marriage felt almost perfect. Julian was affectionate, supportive, attentive. Whenever people complimented our relationship, I smiled proudly. Then his business began collapsing. He owned a property development company that promised luxury apartment complexes across Illinois. At first, delays seemed normal. Construction slowed. Contractors complained about late payments. The banks requested additional documentation. Julian always had another explanation: the economy. Unexpected permits, supply chain problems. I believed every word. Then he began asking questions about my inheritance. Not directly, not at first. How much rent do those buildings actually earn every month? Does your trust allow investments? Could you temporarily loan money to the company? The questions became more frequent every week. When I answered vaguely, he became frustrated. One evening he looked at me across the dining table. We're married. Less. So why are you treating your assets like they're only yours? I calmly placed my fork on the plate. My father wanted them protected. Julian forced a smile. Protected from who? I looked directly into his eyes. Anyone. His smile disappeared. A few weeks later, Eleanor moved into our house. Officially, it was temporary. She claimed repairs were being done to her condominium. 3 months later, she was still living with us. Eleanor possessed a remarkable talent. She could insult someone while sounding perfectly polite. "Oh, Clara," she'd say with a fake smile, "you're wearing another business suit. Women should dress softer for their husbands." Or, "You work too much. Julian deserves someone who focuses on family." Or my personal favorite, "Your father spoiled you." Independent women usually end up lonely. I ignored every comment. Julian rarely defended me. Instead, he'd sigh and whisper, "She's from another generation. Just let it go." I always did. Looking back, I realized silence became my biggest mistake. Because every time I stayed quiet, they became a little bolder, a little crueler, a little more convinced they controlled me. 6 months after Eleanor arrived, the pressure finally became impossible to ignore. One Sunday afternoon, Julian spread financial documents across the dining room table. "There," he pointed toward several pages, "my company only needs a temporary investment." I didn't even sit down. I already said no. He looked surprised. "You haven't even read it." "I don't need to. This could double your money?" "I have enough." His jaw tightened. "You're my wife. I'm also trustee of my father's estate." His voice dropped. "So you trust a dead man's instructions more than your husband?" The room became completely silent. I slowly gathered the papers and handed them back. My answer is still no. Julian stood so quickly his chair nearly tipped over. Eleanor walked into the dining room only seconds later, almost as though she'd been listening from behind the hallway. I knew she'd refuse, she muttered. Julian rubbed both hands across his face. You don't understand what's happening. Then explain. My company needs capital. So ask the bank. They've already refused. The words slipped out before he realized what he'd admitted. Banks, multiple banks, not just one. For the first time, something inside me felt wrong. I watched him carefully. Why did they refuse? Neither of them answered. That silence told me everything. That evening, curiosity replaced trust. After Julian fell asleep, I opened my laptop. Within an hour, I discovered articles about delayed construction projects connected to his company. Several subcontractors had filed lawsuits over unpaid invoices. One supplier claimed millions of dollars were missing. Local newspapers questioned unusual inspection approvals on multiple apartment buildings. Nothing had been proven. But something certainly wasn't right. I quietly saved every article, just in case. The next morning, before leaving for work, I called my father's longtime attorney. His name was Richard Vance. He had known me since I was 12 years old. Good morning, Clara. I have a question. Anything. If someone wanted access to my trust, how difficult would it be? There was a long pause. Finally he answered. Has someone asked? Not directly, but someone will. His voice immediately became serious. Come see me today. When I arrived at his office that afternoon, Mr. Vance closed the conference room door before speaking. Your father expected this conversation someday. He placed a thick folder on the table. Inside were legal protections I had completely forgotten existed. No one, not even my husband, could legally access those properties without my voluntary consent. Not a judge. Not creditors. Not family. Unless someone forged my signature. I stared at him. Would anyone actually try something like that? Mr. Vance looked at me with an expression that still chills me today. I've practiced law for 40 years. He folded his hands. Never underestimate desperate people. I thanked him, returned home, and tried convincing myself I was simply overthinking everything. I had no idea that only 3 days later, my husband and his mother would stop asking for my signature and decide to burn me instead. I barely slept that night. Mr. Vance's warning echoed through my mind over and over again. Never underestimate desperate people. I wanted to believe he was being overly cautious. I wanted to believe Julian still had enough humanity left to accept my decision and move on, but something deep inside me whispered that the man I married had already disappeared, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. The following 3 days were strangely quiet. Too quiet. Julian stopped arguing. He stopped asking about the trust. He even apologized for raising his voice during dinner. I'm sorry, he said while making coffee one morning. I've been under a lot of stress. I smiled politely. It's okay. But it wasn't okay. His sudden kindness felt rehearsed, almost calculated. Even Eleanor changed. She no longer criticized my clothes or my work. Instead, she smiled constantly, offering to cook dinner and asking whether I wanted dessert. It was unlike her. Every instinct I had told me something was coming. I simply didn't know what. Thursday evening arrived like any other. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while I finished reviewing lease agreements for one of my office buildings. Julian walked in carrying his laptop. Long day, I nodded. You. He shrugged. Same. For nearly 20 minutes we talked about completely ordinary things. Weather, traffic, a new restaurant opening downtown. If someone had walked into the house that evening, they would have believed we were a perfectly happy couple. Then Eleanor called from the kitchen. Dinner's ready. The smell of roasted vegetables and grilled chicken filled the room. Everything looked normal. Everything sounded normal, but normal can be the most dangerous disguise. As we sat down, Julian poured wine into 3 glasses. A toast. I looked at him. To what? Fresh starts? Eleanor lifted her glass. Fresh starts. I hesitated before taking a small sip. Julian smiled. You know, he began, I've been thinking. I remained silent. Maybe I've been approaching this the wrong way. I raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? That shouldn't pressure you. That surprised me. You shouldn't. He nodded. I agree. For a brief moment, I almost believed him. Almost. After dinner, Eleanor insisted on cleaning the dishes herself. You two go relax? Julian looked at me. Can we talk? We walked into the living room. He sat beside me on the couch. I miss us. So do I. I hate fighting over money. So do I. He reached for my hand. What if we forget about the company? I studied his face. There wasn't a single sign of anger, only regret. I'm willing to move forward, I answered. So am I. He kissed my forehead. I love you. 3 simple words. Words I had waited months to hear. Yet somehow, they felt completely empty. Around 8 o'clock, I stood up. I'm getting some tea. No, I laughed. I've got it. I walked toward the kitchen without another thought. The lights were warm. The dishwasher hummed quietly. Eleanor stood at the stove with her back facing me. She appeared to be preparing something in a cast iron pan. I frowned. I thought dinner was over. It is. What are you cooking? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly turned around. There was something in her eyes I had never seen before, not anger, not frustration, hatred, pure hatred. Before I could speak, Julian stepped into the kitchen behind me. The sound of his footsteps made me glance over my shoulder. Then, I heard the lock click. The back door had been locked. Every exit behind me was gone. A strange chill ran through my body. What are you doing? Julian folded his arms. We're having one last conversation. I already gave you my answer. No, he smiled. You gave me the wrong answer. Eleanor picked up the heavy frying pan. Steam curled into the air. Only then did I realize what she had been heating. Oil, boiling oil. My heartbeat exploded inside my chest. What are you doing? I stepped backward instinctively. Julian didn't move. He simply blocked the doorway. You'll sign tonight. I'm not signing anything. You will. No. His face hardened instantly. For 6 months we've asked politely. I continued backing away. There are other options. There aren't. Julian, he interrupted me. You've always thought you're smarter than everyone. I never said that. You didn't have to. Eleanor took another step forward. You think those buildings belong to you. They do. They belong to this family. My father left them to me. She laughed. Your father is dead. The words hit harder than I expected. Why not? You've hidden behind his trust for years. My father protected me. No. She smiled coldly. He protected his money. I looked directly at Julian. Please isn't you. For just a second. I thought I saw hesitation, a tiny crack in the mask. Then it disappeared. He looked at Eleanor. Do it. Those 2 words changed my life forever. I barely had time to scream. Eleanor swung the pan with shocking force. The boiling oil struck my shoulder first, then my neck, then my chest. The pain wasn't immediate. For one terrifying heartbeat, my body simply froze. Then it felt as though my skin had been set on fire. I screamed so loudly my own voice barely sounded human. The cup slipped from my hands. Glass shattered across the kitchen floor. I stumbled backward and crashed against the marble island before collapsing onto the tiles. The pain became unbearable. Every breath felt like flames entering my lungs. I clawed desperately at my shirt, trying to pull the burning fabric away from my skin. Nothing helped. Nothing. I begged for help. Please. Julian slowly walked toward me. Not running, not panicking, walking, calmly. He looked down at me while I trembled on the floor. There wasn't fear in his face. There wasn't guilt. Only disappointment. He crouched beside me. His voice was almost gentle. You should have listened. I couldn't stop crying. He leaned closer. I'm divorcing you. I stared at him through tears. I refused to spend my life married to an ugly monster. Behind him, Eleanor laughed. Actually laughed. As though my suffering entertained her. Everything became blurry. The smell of burned fabric filled the room. My skin felt as if thousands of knives were cutting into it. I struggled to stay conscious. Somewhere far away I heard Eleanor speaking. Clean the floor. Julian nodded. I'll call the ambulance. Not yet. We need our story first. They weren't trying to save me. They were preparing their lies. Eleanor carried the pan to the sink and washed it carefully. Then she removed her blouse and changed into another one. Julian picked up broken glass from the floor. He wiped oil from the counter. Every movement was calm, organized, practiced. It was as if they had rehearsed everything long before tonight. Lying on the cold kitchen floor, barely able to breathe, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't even an argument that went too far. It was a plan. A plan that had begun months earlier. And unless I survived, they would get everything they wanted. Just before darkness swallowed me completely, I heard Julian dialing 911. His voice suddenly sounded frantic. Oh my God! She spilled hot oil on herself. It was a terrible accident. Then, I lost consciousness. The first thing I heard was a steady electronic beeping. Then came the smell. Not smoke, not fire, antiseptic, hospital disinfectant. My eyelids felt impossibly heavy, but after several attempts, I managed to open them just enough to see bright white lights hanging above me. My throat burned every time I breathed, and my shoulder felt as though it had been wrapped in fire. A nurse noticed my eyes opening. Clara, can you hear me? I tried to answer. Only a raspy whisper came out. She immediately leaned closer. Don't try to speak too much. You're safe, safe. It was the first comforting word I had heard all night. Within minutes, doctors surrounded my bed. Someone checked my pupils. Another adjusted an IV line. A surgeon gently examined the thick bandages covering my shoulder and neck. You suffered second-degree burns, he explained carefully. Some areas are deeper than others. We're doing everything possible to minimize permanent damage. I nodded weakly. My first question wasn't about the burns. It wasn't about surgery. It wasn't even about whether I would recover. I whispered one word. Julian, the room became strangely quiet. The nurse looked toward the doorway. He's outside. I closed my eyes. Of course he was. Waiting, watching, pretending. About 30 minutes later, Julian walked into my hospital room carrying a bouquet of white lilies. Anyone watching would have believed he was the perfect husband. His eyes looked red, his shoulders slumped, his expression appeared devastated. The performance deserved an award. He slowly approached my bed. Oh, Clara, he reached for my hand. I pulled it away. For a split second his fake concern disappeared. Then the mask returned. I'm so glad you're alive. I stared at him. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally he leaned closer until only I could hear him. You should have listened. The warmth instantly disappeared from his voice. His smile became cold. Things didn't have to happen this way. I could barely speak. You. He interrupted, careful. He glanced toward the hallway. People are listening. Then he lowered his voice again. The doctors say you'll probably have scars. I remained silent. What a shame. He tilted his head. I can't imagine spending my life with someone who looks like. He paused deliberately. Tears filled my eyes, not because of my injuries, because I finally understood. The man I loved had never existed. He had only been pretending. The nurse entered a moment later. Julian immediately transformed again. He squeezed my hand. I'll never leave her side. The nurse smiled sympathetically. She's lucky to have you. Lucky. If only she knew. Julian kissed my forehead. I'll be right outside. As soon as the door closed, I pressed the nurse call button. When she returned, I whispered, I need the police. She looked surprised. The police, please. She studied my face for a long moment. Then she quietly nodded. I'll notify hospital security. That decision changed everything. The following morning, 2 detectives arrived. One introduced herself. I'm Detective Sarah Lynn. Beside her stood a domestic violence investigator named Emily Carter. Sarah pulled a chair beside my bed. I know this is difficult. I nodded. But I need you to tell me exactly what happened. For several seconds I simply stared at the ceiling. Then I began talking everything. The pressure, the arguments, the trust, the threats, the boiling oil, Julian blocking the doorway, Eleanor laughing. Neither detective interrupted me. They wrote notes continuously. When I finally finished, Detective Lynn asked only one question. Do you believe this attack was intentional? I looked directly into her eyes. There isn't a single doubt. She slowly closed her notebook. Then we're treating this as attempted murder. That afternoon, hospital security informed Detective Lynn that Julian had requested another visit. She agreed. But this time, she prepared. A recording device was hidden inside my bedside table. Another detective waited outside the room. Julian entered carrying coffee. You look better. I said nothing. He sat beside me. I've been thinking. Still nothing. We can still fix this. I turned my head toward him. Fix what? Our future. He leaned closer. Withdraw your statement. What statement? The one you gave the police. I told them the truth. He laughed quietly. No, you told them a story. I remained silent. He lowered his voice. Transfer the buildings. I stared at him. I'll never do that. His smile vanished. Help me understand. Our company is collapsing. I know. His eyes widened. What? I know about the lawsuits. Silence. I know about the unpaid contractors. More silence. I know the banks refused you. His face slowly changed. Gon was the charming businessman. Standing before me now was a desperate man trapped inside his own lies. You've been investigating me. New. I've been protecting myself. Julian stood up and began pacing the room. You've always thought you were smarter than everyone. I never thought that. You made me do this. I blinked. I'm sorry. You forced my hand. I almost laughed. You poured boiling oil on me? You wouldn't cooperate. His voice rose. You cared more about your father's money than your own husband. The hidden recorder captured every word. Outside the room, the detective Lynn listened through headphones. Julian had absolutely no idea. He continued talking. If you had simply signed the transfer, none of this would have happened. There it was, the confession. Not complete, but enough. I calmly asked, so burning me was your solution? He shrugged. It got your attention. The room fell silent. I could hardly believe what I just heard. Neither could the detectives outside. Julian suddenly realized he had spoken too much. His expression changed instantly. He forced another smile. I didn't mean, too late, the damage was done. He stood quickly. I'll come back tomorrow. No. He frowned. What? Don't come back? You don't mean that? I do. He walked toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back one last time. You'll regret choosing them over me." Then he disappeared. Seconds later, Detective Lynn entered. She placed the recorder on my bed. "Congratulations." I looked confused. "For what?" She smiled. "He just buried himself." Meanwhile, another investigation had already begun. Detectives obtained a warrant for our house. Julian believed he had destroyed every piece of evidence. He hadn't. The kitchen security camera had indeed been disabled shortly after the attack. But he forgot something. My father had insisted years earlier that every recording automatically upload to encrypted cloud storage. Nothing had been erased. By evening, Detective Lynn called me. "We recovered the footage." My heart started racing. She continued. "It shows Eleanor heating the oil." I closed my eyes. "It shows you backing away." Tears rolled down my face. "It shows Julian blocking the kitchen doorway." Then came the words I would never forget. "And it clearly records him saying." She paused. "Do it. She'll sign when she's scared enough." I couldn't speak. Months of manipulation, weeks of pressure, the attack, every lie, every betrayal. Now, it all existed on video. For the first time since waking up in that hospital bed, I finally believed something. Julian Mercer wasn't going to escape justice. I spent the next 3 weeks recovering in the burn unit, but healing wasn't the only thing happening behind those hospital walls. Every day, Detective Sarah Lynn called with another update. Every day, Julian's carefully constructed life fell apart one piece at a time. The first breakthrough came from the security footage. Although Julian had disabled the kitchen camera less than an hour after the attack, he had forgotten about the encrypted cloud backup linked to my personal account. My father had insisted on installing it years earlier, saying, "People don't always tell the truth, Clara. Cameras don't have that problem." He was right. The video showed Eleanor placing the cast iron pan on the stove nearly 20 minutes before I entered the kitchen. She wasn't cooking dinner. She was heating oil. It showed Julian walking through the house, checking that every door was locked. It showed him glancing toward the camera just before disconnecting it. Most importantly, it captured the moment I backed away in fear while Julian stood in the doorway. Then everyone heard his voice. "Do it. She'll sign when she's scared enough." There was no misunderstanding, no accident, no self-defense. It was attempted murder. That same evening, officers arrived at Eleanor's condominium. She was arrested for aggravated assault and conspiracy. When detectives informed her that the entire attack had been recorded, she refused to speak another word. Julian wasn't arrested immediately. His attorney managed to secure temporary protection while detectives continued gathering financial evidence. Julian believed he still had time. He was wrong. Instead of staying quiet, Julian launched a public campaign to destroy my reputation. He stood outside the hospital surrounded by reporters, pretending to cry. "My wife has been struggling emotionally," he told cameras. "This terrible accident has affected her deeply." He called me unstable. He suggested I had become paranoid after my father's death. He even implied that I had burned myself during a panic attack. Watching those interviews from my hospital room made me physically sick. The man who had nearly killed me was now presenting himself as the victim. But lies don't survive forever, especially when evidence refuses to stay hidden. Mr. Richard Vance visited me almost every afternoon. One morning he entered my room carrying 3 thick folders. "I think we've found something." I raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Everything." He placed the folders on the table beside my bed. Julian wasn't simply asking for your inheritance. He opened the first file. He had already been using it. I frowned. "How?" He slid several loan documents toward me. My heart nearly stopped. My signature appeared at the bottom of every page. Except, I had never signed them. "They're forged?" Mr. Vance nodded. "We hired 2 handwriting experts." He opened another report. They both reached the same conclusion. Every signature had been copied. Every document was fraudulent. Julian had secretly pledged income from my commercial properties as collateral for millions of dollars in business loans. Without my permission. Without any legal authority, my father's trust prevented him from touching those buildings. So instead, he had stolen my identity. The investigation expanded rapidly. Forensic accountants began examining Julian's development company. The deeper they looked, the uglier everything became. Millions of dollars had disappeared. Construction budgets had been inflated. Payments had been routed through shell companies. Then investigators discovered inspection records. Several apartment complexes built by Julian's company had passed safety inspections despite serious violations. Faulty electrical systems. Missing fire barriers. Inferior concrete. Defective structural supports. Someone had approved dangerous buildings. Detective Lynn called me immediately. "We believe inspectors accepted bribes." And Julian Hay appears to have arranged every payment. Suddenly everything made sense. The banks hadn't rejected Julian because of temporary financial problems. They rejected him because his entire company was collapsing under fraud. And when creditors started demanding repayment, he needed my inheritance to cover everything. The attack had never been about anger, it had always been about money. 3 days later, investigators uncovered something even worse. An offshore bank account. Nearly $2 million had been transferred there only 3 days before I was attacked. Detectives recovered deleted emails between Julian and Eleanor. One message froze my blood. Once Clara signs we leave, she can keep the scars. I stared at the screen for nearly a minute. He had already planned his escape. Even if I survived, he intended to abandon me forever. My marriage had ended long before the attack. I simply hadn't known it. 6 weeks after entering the hospital, the doctors finally cleared me to leave. The scars stretched from my shoulder across my neck and part of my chest. Compression garments covered most of the burns, while a silk scarf hid the rest. Standing outside the hospital felt strange. The sun warmed my face. Fresh air filled my lungs. For the first time in weeks, I felt alive. Across the street, however, Julian stood beside his attorney. He smiled as if nothing had happened. As I walked toward my car, he called my name. Clara. I stopped. You still have time. I slowly turned around. He folded his hands. Drop the charges. We can still settle this. There is nothing left to settle. He took one step closer. I'll destroy you in court. I looked directly into his eyes. You already tried. Then I got into my car and drove away. It was the last conversation we ever had outside a courtroom. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. Journalists filled nearly every seat. The case had become national news. People expected a bitter divorce. Instead, they witnessed one of the largest financial fraud investigations in recent memory. Julian's attorney confidently addressed the judge. My client devoted himself to caring for his wife after a tragic household accident. Mr. Vance calmly stood. Your Honor. He placed a hard drive on the evidence table. Would like to play several recordings. The courtroom became silent. First came the kitchen video, then Julian's recorded confession from my hospital room, then the forged loan documents, then the handwriting experts, then the offshore bank transfers, then the bribery records. Finally, the email. Once Clara signs we leave, she can keep the scars. Julian's face lost every trace of confidence. His attorney slowly lowered his head. Judge Margaret Ross looked directly at Julian. I have practiced law for over 30 years. Her voice echoed through the courtroom. I have rarely witnessed such calculated cruelty. She denied every financial claim against my trust. She ordered Julian to pay every dollar of my medical expenses, every legal fee, every damage caused by the attack. Then she referred the fraud investigation for criminal prosecution. Before Julian could even leave the courtroom, 2 federal agents approached him. One agent produced a pair of handcuffs. You're under arrest. For the first time since I met him, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He looked at me desperately. Clara, please. I didn't answer. Some conversations no longer deserve a response. Nearly a year later, justice finally arrived. Eleanor accepted a guilty plea for aggravated assault, conspiracy, and witness intimidation. She received 11 years in state prison. Julian was convicted of fraud, forgery, bribery, conspiracy, identity theft, and aiding the violent attack against me. The judge sentenced him to 17 years in federal prison. His company declared bankruptcy. Unsafe apartment buildings were repaired under court supervision. Families who had unknowingly lived in dangerous homes finally received compensation. As for me, I chose not to disappear behind my scars. Instead, I reopened one of the commercial buildings Julian had tried so desperately to steal. It became the Clara Mercer Recovery Center, offering legal assistance, emergency housing, trauma counseling, and financial guidance for survivors of domestic violence and financial abuse. On opening day, I stood before hundreds of people without wearing a scarf for the very first time. Sunlight touched the scars Julian believed would ruin my life. Instead, they reminded me how strong I had become. I once believed revenge meant watching the people who hurt me suffer, and now I understand something much more powerful. Real revenge is rebuilding your life so completely that the people who tried to destroy you become nothing more than a painful chapter in a much greater story. My husband thought burning my skin would break my spirit. He was wrong. He only burned away my fear. The woman who walked out of that courtroom wasn't the same woman who had fallen onto the kitchen floor months earlier. She was stronger, wiser, unbreakable. And every time I look in the mirror now, I don't see a victim, I see a survivor. Story summary: Clara Mercer refused to surrender the inheritance her father left her, even after months of pressure from her husband, Julian, and his mother, Eleanor. Desperate to save their collapsing business and hide years of financial fraud, they planned a brutal attack that left Clara severely burned. But they underestimated her preparation, her father's legal protections, and the evidence they left behind. Through courage, careful documentation, and an unwavering pursuit of justice, Clara exposed their crimes, reclaimed her life, and transformed her pain into hope for others. A story lesson: true strength is not measured by what you lose. It's measured by what you choose to become after everything has been taken from you. Trust should be earned, greed always has consequences, and justice may take time. But the truth has a remarkable way of finding the light. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below to share your thoughts. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories every week. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, never let anyone convince you that your worth depends on what they can take from you.